So I'm Matthew Gaskell. I'm a consultant psychologist and a clinical lead for addictions with the Leeds and York Partnership NHS Foundation Trust, and I have a role as the clinical lead for the new NHS Northern Gambling Service. So we talked a little bit about the product, what you could equate to a drug of abuse, for example, or alcohol. It's important to know that those products have an impact on the brain, and they change the brain. So what we see under a gambling situation is very similar to what we see when somebody's used drugs or used alcohol. So there's some brain chemicals that are relevant here as well that produce this sort of sensation of being drawn as if it's like a magnet towards the behaviour, the preoccupation. There's a reward system that tends to get triggered off by cues and associations, and the brain kind of recognises perceptually that the person's probably in a gambling situation, and so it produces dopamine is kind of pumped through the reward system, which focuses the mind and focuses the individual down onto the goal, onto this highly desired attractive goal and behaviour. And we tend not to engage the front part of our brain that we all need in life as a sort of a check and a balance for us all to engage, effective impulse control and so on. It's much more difficult to do that, and the front part of the brain is much less engaged. There's much less crosstalk between the desire part of the brain, if you like, and the brake system, the front part of the brain. And that's important to know in terms of thinking about how we look at people who engage in these kind of behaviours. They're constrained in all kinds of ways once the behaviour is developed and the reinforcement has got going. It's not something that feels to them like a free choice, which often is the discourse in society. Neither is it necessarily an involuntary, purely involuntary behaviour. Clearly there's volitional behaviour into this, but it's highly constrained. And people, once they're in those addiction patterns, they perceive that there's really nothing else in their life other than this behaviour, and their complete focus and preoccupation is on it. So that's a little bit about effects on the brain, but really want to broaden it out because addiction has to be seen on a number of levels. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, so you need to think about the environment, the social context. Interestingly, with gambling, of course, we've got what are called ecological factors. So we've got wide accessibility of these products, easy availability. Our high streets have transformed in the last 10 years, of course, where we see land-based bookmakers, for example, and casinos in our cities. So that's part of it, but there's been this huge change from land-based gambling onto online, and of course having access 24/7 to online operators on your smartphone or iPad, for example, means that there's just so much more availability and accessibility, and there isn't quite the checks and balances online yet that we'd like to see. So there's lots of concerns about online behaviour. So that gives us a bit of an idea about the environment. We're aware as well of all the advertising, the mass advertising that's going on our TV screens, on social media, the way that data is used on us these days, of course. So once data is known that somebody has an interest in gambling, of course people follow, they target people, they send them emails. There's an environment too in terms of enticing people to continue to gamble, giving free offers to gamble, of course. There are VIP schemes which I think are very, very controversial and potentially cause a lot of harm to people, where that's, they're made to seem very special, and they're followed by operators and given all sorts of inducements to gamble, or going on free events, going to football matches, going to the races and so on. There's really deep levels of poverty in our society. There's grotesque levels of inequality in our society. There are lots of people who are growing up in very adverse circumstances, very stressed parents already, perhaps not focusing their attention quite as much on the kids, trying their best. There's lots of neglect that's going on. Sometimes that's very explicit, sometimes that's more subtle, and people trying to do their best. A lot of people are growing up in our society feeling very uneasy about themselves, very stressed, anxious, lots more sort of low mood problems. And then we've got this explosion of social media and people comparing themselves to very artificial things like, appearance and looks and goods and consumerism and so on. Irrespective of your politics and how you might view those things, I think that those are just the facts of the generation of people that are growing up, or certainly that's my opinion and how I view things. So I think arising out of some of those ingredients, there's many more, but those are some of those environmental and social factors. We can see how people are really just trying to feel their way into life, not feeling very good about themselves, not feeling like they fit in very well. All sorts of struggles as a result of austerity and how costly it is to live and to do well in society today. So I think some of those things are underneath a whole variety of different difficulties that we're seeing and experiencing as people are striving to just feel better about themselves, feel safer, protecting themselves in all kinds of ways. And addictions are one of a number of things. Not everybody who comes from those kind of backgrounds are going to have an addiction, but most of the people that I see with addictions have vulnerabilities in their background and in the environment and the social. When you get a bit of a social history and a developmental history, you can see some of those factors emerging.